All right, everyone. Hello. Welcome to today's webinar. This is our fourth part of the DFSCA requirements presented by Dr. Eric Davidson. You all will have access to the question box. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, go ahead and drop them in there. But without further ado, we have Dr. Davidson.
Thanks. Jennifer, just to let me know, are you guys getting the main slide on the screen?
We're getting the main slide, and then it says next slide as well. I don't know if you want to show that.
That better?
Nope, still the same page.
That different?
This is, it's showing the PowerPoint slide with the slides off to the side, like it looks like. There we go, that's just the main slide.
Okay. Okay, hello everybody, happy Wednesday. One of the things that we want everybody to know, and some of you may be in a similar situation, with the excessive heat that we are experiencing in Illinois, and the fact that our university is a major utilizer of energy. Our university has been put under a warning that we may be having rolling brownouts. And it has been over a decade since we've been having browning rollouts on the institution. So we're not necessarily certain what that is going to mean for us. And it may impact our network, it may impact our Wi-Fi, and it may impact our ability to project out through GoToWebinar. So I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as I can in hopes that we will avoid that. So if you think that Eric's talking a little fast, I'm doing so for that reason. Just as an overcap, this is the fourth session of a four-part series. During session one, we basically provided an overview of Drug-Free Schools and Campuses Act. We listed the primary requirements. We talked about those elements of certification and how the Department of Ed was currently monitoring and enforcing the act. During the second session, we spent all of our time focusing on what is known as the Drug and Alcohol Prevention Program notice, discussing the elements that are required of that notice, how it should go out to everybody at least once a year, and the different ways that different schools distribute that notice to all students, staff, and faculty. Last week during session 3, we really tried to answer the very ambiguous question of what is a program and how you might go about developing a framework for your practice of a comprehensive program to address substance use on your campus using different program standards, different frameworks, and using the NIAAA's what had used to be new but is probably now commonplace college alcohol intervention matrix, and again, how you may be able to use different standards and models in program development. Today, we're going to spend all of our time focusing on the biennial review and looking at that process, looking at the reporting of the biennial review process, talking a little bit about best practices of what a good biennial review process looks like, looking at the different sources of information and data that your institution may wish to collect and determining the state of substance use on your campus for that biennial review, and then really stress how important it is to not only collect data, but really analyze that data and develop a strategic plan moving forward for the next 2 years for the next biennial review process. As with every workshop, I would say if you're not familiar with the Complying with the Drug-Free Schools and Campuses Regulation book, that you go and you get a copy of that, you download it, you read it from cover to cover, and you become very familiar with it. It is our guide, it is our Bible for the drug-free schools and campuses regulations, and it should answer a good plethora of questions that many of you may have. So when we get to what is the biennial review and what's really expected of it from the feds, we are required to review our comprehensive substance use program every 2 years. And when we look at this biennial review, we are to look at our programs as well as our policies. A lot of people do a really great job of looking at their programs, of inventorying their programs, of looking at the impact of their programs. A lot of people bypass and miss over the policies. But we're really supposed to look at those two elements of a comprehensive substance use program. Now, unlike Clary, where there are a lot of specifics and a lot of specified timelines, when things should be done and how things should be done, there's a lot of ambiguity with the biennial review. So the Department of Ed says that we should do it every 2 years, but there's not really a specific date in which the report needs to be done by. So depending upon your campus schedule, your campus calendar, some people will use regular fiscal years, others use federal fiscal years, some will use academic years, some campuses will do things a little bit differently because they're on the quarter system. But realize that there's really not a specific date in which the report is to be filed. There have been some practices that have come about just based upon what the majority of the field does, but there's really nothing specific. And there's really nothing specific that says that it has to be done during even years. That really is just a matter of practice. And the main reason for that is because for most of us, if we had been doing it consistently and correctly every year since the beginning, it began in 1990. So our first biennial review would have been due in 1992. And if we had kept that cycle, we would have maintained and sustained a cycle during even years. If it should be completed and filed, and I use the phrase or the word filed loosely, it really needs to be done by December 31st. And however you define academic years or whatever period you are using, it should cover the previous 2 years. So whether it's an academic year, it's a fiscal year, a calendar year, really the previous 2 academic years, not the academic year that you are currently in. This is actually from the guideline in the book, and I like throwing it up there because, again, it is direct text from the book, and again, it doesn't specify a date in which the review must be completed and unfiled. It just says you have to do it every 2 years. Practice is that most people do it on even years, and they complete it by the end of each even numbered year. So, for example, we are currently in an even numbered year. So most people would begin work on their biennial review beginning July 1st, and they would try to have their review process and report completed by December 31st. And then they would basically be looking at academic year 22, academic year 21, fiscal year 22, fiscal year 21. And those would be the periods in which that they would be looking at during their biennial review period. Now, as we said, the biennial review looks at the comprehensive program. So whatever framework you are using, whether it be the network standards, whether it be the American College Health Standards of Health Promotion, whatever it is that you're using as a framework to guide your practice, ultimately you need to be looking at the effectiveness of your program and the program elements. And then you need to be looking at the policies, particularly the sanctions that have been developed to address the policies and to make sure that they're consistently enforced and consistently sanctioned. And again, a lot of people do a really good job of looking at the programs, the educational interventions, the counseling interventions, and are able to report utilization numbers, and, you know, some learning outcomes related to the programs and interventions, and maybe even some behavioral changes. But it's the policies that when I go out and I do a lot of site visits, or when I look over a lot of biennial review reports, that's the area that seems to be lacking for a lot of content and a lot of depth for a lot of schools. So what are some of the best practices when it comes to a biennial review process? Again, it's comprehensive. So it's not just looking at your educational program. You're really looking at a wide set of strategies. If we were to follow the NIAAA college aim, we would be looking at individual strategies. We would be looking at environmental strategies. If we were using the network framework, we would be looking at education, student support and assistance, community mobilization, collaboration, policy, enforcement. So again, you know, looking at multiple strategies, social ecological approach, looking at a lot of different layers and levels of substance use prevention that's occurring on your campus. Data collection is key, particularly of students' behaviors and perceptions. So if your campus is not currently engaged in any form of data collection, whether it be survey data, data that you've collected from different reports, and we'll talk a little bit more about different data points that you might collect, I would strongly urge and encourage all of you to do that. When you look at your substance use program, looking at addressing the needs of students at various levels. So not just looking at those students that may be problematic, but also looking at the low-level drinkers, looking at the non-drinkers and the abstainers, as well as those that may be in recovery and are choosing not to drink. Typically, when we look at biennial review best practices, it is not a lone ranger operation. It's not the work of one person. It's usually a task force, a coalition, it's a group that is pulling all the information and data together. They're doing analysis, they're having discussions, and they're creating a strategic plan of action to move forward to help improve and make the campus comprehensive program better. So in that sense, they're really taking a growth mindset for the comprehensive program rather than a fixed mindset. In the late 90s, the former National Higher Education Center collected a random sample of biennial reviews, and they did a document analysis, and from that document analysis, they came up with a list of some things that they thought made a thorough biennial review process. And some of those elements would be a complete description of your alcohol and other drug comprehensive program, the interventions, the elements, the policies along a continuum of care, a set of goals of what you were hoping to achieve during the last 2 years and whether or not the institution was successful in achieving those goals. So whether it be a reduction in binge drinking, a reduction in DUI or other AOD behaviors, or the development and implementation of particular strategies, programs, interventions, you know, statements about what you had set out to do from your last biennial review and whether or not you were successful or not. Looking at your comprehensive program and the strengths of your program, looking at your program and identifying the weaknesses and the challenges and the problems that can be addressed, as well as making sure that you have content in your biennial review process and you're looking at how your drug and alcohol prevention program notice is distributed to students and employees. Is it still a viable process? Is it still a process that works? Is it still getting the information out to those people that need to be getting it? Have there been changes in the context of your institution? And as a result of those changes, are you overlooking getting that notice? So for example, many institutions are now engaged in the concept of dual credit coursework and have high school students at off-campus facilities getting 4 credit classes. And a lot of institutions are not considering the need to present that drug and alcohol prevention program notice to those high school students. And by law, if those students are getting academic credit, they should be getting that notice. And then most importantly, making sure that you have recommendations for revising and updating and improving different elements of your programs and policies, and then including any supporting documentation and evidence. Some other things to consider, and it ties into the last statement, making sure that you have materials to complement the report. I liken the biennial review process to a process that many of our institutions go through for accreditation. And often that involves going out and collecting a lot of information, a lot of data, perhaps interviewing folks, looking at different reports on campus, getting data from different offices. It's not that you have to include everything. There may be some bits of information that warrant being attached to the report that you generate. Another component is, as you go about your review process, making sure that you include details about your assessment and evaluation processes. It's probably just not good enough to sit there and say, we think that this program is great and we're very happy with it, but if you're saying that the program is effective, how do you actually know that it's effective? What were the objectives of that program? How do you know that the objectives of the program were met? What were the process outcomes? What were the learning outcomes? What were the behavioral outcomes of that program? And how can you provide evidence and documentation that those outcomes were actually met? Goals and goals achievement, we've covered that. So, including that in there. And then again, at the end, recommendations for what you're going to be doing for the next 2 years. A lot of times when I've gone out to do assessments, evaluations, site visits, when people have sent me their biennial reviews, a lot of times people forget those recommendations for what needs to be tackled or what needs to be changed, in the next 2 years. And again, looking at a task force to complete them. So those are elements that are considered best practices. So you may be sitting there going, we've never done a biennial review process, or we've done a biennial review process, but we're really looking for ways to improve it and make it better. So where do we start? How do we go about doing things a little bit differently? So I would always say, start with reviewing your campus AOD data. And a good place to start is looking at any survey data that you may have. A lot of institutions participate in national surveys, such as the core survey from the Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. Many institutions participate in the National College Health Assessment Survey, which is a broad-based survey looking at a wide variety of college health topics, but it has a pretty substantial section on substance use. Probably on your campus, especially if you have master's degrees programs and doctoral degree programs, there are probably some students in those master and PhD and graduate programs that have probably done some research on substance use, and there may be some recent graduate work that you can use to look at for data related to issues on your campus. Some faculty on your campus may have also done their own research. So look and see what survey data is there that may be able to help you begin to paint a picture of what the issue looks like on your campus, what use looks like on your campus, what beliefs and attitudes and values students and faculty have, regarding substance use on campus and start developing a foundation. When we look at the national and state surveys, you know, a lot of the big ones collect data on frequency and duration of use in the last year, the last 30 days, underage use, amount consumed in the last 2 weeks, illicit drug use, including marijuana use, illegal drug use, excluding marijuana, public misconduct, negative consequences. And those are all good data points to have. And some of the surveys even get a little bit more in depth, looking at student attitudes, beliefs, social norms, whether it's the perceived social norms, whether they're descriptive or injunctive, asking students for their own thoughts and being able to give some aggregate data on actual social norms as well as the impacts on substance use. So again, looking to see if any of this data is on your campus is always a good starting point. Regardless of your campus, regardless of whether it's a community college, a private institution, small, a religious institution, a much larger flagship institution, I would say that there is probably plenty of information and data on your campus. So whether it's policy violations through your student conduct office, talking to whoever oversees your campus security report and getting some of that clarity data, looking at your campus security, your law enforcement agency, and being able to get some data from them related to substance use, maybe looking off campus and talking to your local EMS service, or if your campus is fortunate enough to have an EMS service, looking at data regarding aggregate numbers for transports which resulted from substance use. If you have a medical clinic or a counseling clinic on campus, looking at the number of clinical diagnoses in aggregate, looking at emergency department reports for substance use, if you can get local emergency departments to provide you reports and are able to generate that information in aggregate. Again, there's just a lot of data. If you can build a bridge with student athletics and are able to get aggregate data for policy violations, athletic drug testing violations, you know, that's good data to have. And when you look at other student groups and other affiliate populations on your campus, whether it be fraternity, sorority life, academic groups, on-campus populations, residence life, you know, we have a lot of subpopulations on campus, and there may be some larger subpopulations on campus that actually track the kind of data that you're looking for. And it's important to not only think about student-related data, but it's also important to think about faculty and staff-related data. So if your campus has an employee assistance program, seeing if you can get some numbers from that particular program on the number of faculty and staff that are accessing the EAP program for purposes related to substance use. So again, lots of different data points that you can track. Now, one of the questions that I often get asked is, you know, there's all this data out there. Is there anything specifically that the feds or the Department of Ed is really, really looking for in a biennial review? Again, this report, this act, this mandate went into effect in the late 90s. And when it came out in the Federal Register, there was some guidance as to specific data points that universities were strongly encouraged to collect. Looking at the number of drug and alcohol related disciplinary sanctions imposed, tracking the number of drug and alcohol related referrals for counseling or treatment, tracking the number of drug and alcohol related incidents recorded in the logs of campus police or other law enforcement office officials. That's our clarity data. Tracking the number of drug and alcohol related incidents of vandalism. Probably for that, you would need to talk to law enforcement, possibly housing, residence life staff. Tracking the number of students and employees attending self-help or other counseling groups related to substance use. looking at your counseling, your health and counseling offices, perhaps your dean of students, perhaps your HR, your employee assistance program, and then tracking student, faculty, and employee attitudes and perceptions about drug and alcohol problems on campus. Again, that's where the national surveys are really helpful. Again, these are the data points that the federal registrar recommended. So if you don't have them, those would be data points that I would really recommend that you include in your review process. And again, if you're starting from scratch, these would be the 6 points that I would really encourage you to start out with. When I work with schools, and especially those that are beginning from scratch, and say, well, how do we start? Where do we go? Or, you know, we've been doing it, we want to make sure we're doing the process right, or, you know, we just kind of need to overhaul it and really kind of start new. You know, how would you suggest we start? I always like to recommend that the people break it down kind of into 3 domains. One would be your programs, and you know, that's really your educational programs. One would be your interventions. So that would be enforcement, that would be clinical assessment, that would be treatment. And then the other area would be your policies. My experience has been that those 3 areas lend well to subcommittees, bringing people together. You know, the intervention people typically work well together. So whether it's the dean of students office, student conduct, the counseling staff, on and off campus law enforcement, residence life staff, you know, those people typically work together. They're often on student intervention teams, BIT teams. So, you know, they already have existing relationships. The program people, the health educators, student life, res life, they tend to fall in the same kind of social circle as well. So it just seems to work really well, and that would be my recommendation. Last week when we talked about models and programs, I would also encourage you to think about matrices. And those of you who know me go, well, you know, that's not surprising from Eric. He's a sci-fi geek. You know, why wouldn't you bring up the matrix? Where's the picture of, you know, the matrix folks? Just to give some examples of what you might consider. Last week we talked about the social ecological model, and we know that there is individual, group, institution, community, and policy levels. We also know from the discussion of the network standards that there are standards of policy, education, enforcement, assessment, and community mobilization. What I recommend is, as you sit down and create a laundry list of all the different things that you do on your campus related to substance use, you figure out which box things go into. So if you sit there and go, well, we do basics. Basics is probably an individual intervention that would fall under education. We do bystander intervention. Well, that would be a group intervention that falls under education. We have DUI enforcement because we have a DUI grant that allows us to buy back extra officers. Well, that's probably policy and enforcement, so it would go under the box that is on the far right where policy and enforcement intersect. Well, we do the National College Health Assessment. Well, that's an institutional-wide initiative, and that's for assessment, so it would fall in that box. List everything in the boxes, and what it will do is it will kind of give you a picture of where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, and as you think about moving forward, if you need to reallocate some resources, some staff time, you know, you may be able to sit there and go, boy, we've got a lot under individual education. Maybe we can cut back on some things and focus a little bit more on group education. Or we need to do more about community education, because we're doing a really great job addressing substance use and we really don't have as many problems as people are misperceiving, but we need to go out into the community and let them know this is what we're doing to address these issues. This is the good work that we're doing, and really trying to use that as an avenue to create some goodwill, to share some good news about the work that you're doing. And you know, hopefully that the problem is not as bad as the community is perceiving it to be. Similar matrix using the SAMHSA prevention strategies with the social ecological model. So again, you know, you can use that. Last week we talked about the college AIM. Again, they've got a great worksheet tool, so I won't go over that, but again, it's a really great instrument to use for a biennial review process, looking at what you have, what you might want, effectiveness, cost, barriers, especially when it comes to looking at recommendations moving forward after the review process is complete. As you go through, you know, it can seem very overwhelming, and some people will be like, oh my goodness, we're nowhere near where we need to be. I always say, start where you're at. If you don't have anything, you don't have anything. If this has not been done on your campus for years, it's not been done on your campus for years. You can't change that. You can't change the past. Be open-minded and realize that, okay, we can't change the past, but we're going to change the present, and we're going to impact the future. When it comes to evaluation and assessment, I often think of a continuum, and you know, everybody's somewhere. It might be that you are collecting data on the number of times programs and interventions are delivered, but you're collecting some kind of utilization data. You might be collecting a little bit more strong data by looking at the numbers of students, staff, and faculty who are participating. That data may even be a little bit more stronger because you're looking at demographic breakdowns and giving frequencies of subpopulations and demographics. You may be taking it a step further and looking at whether or not people are happy and satisfied with the programs and services that they're receiving. You might be looking at those that are delivering the programs and interventions and who have administered the policies, and looking at their comments and remarks about the administration or delivery of the programs and policies, and you know, what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it, and what they would change the next time they would deliver it. In today's age, you're probably looking at financial costs. So there's a lot of process indicators that we collect data for, often as a result of our end of the year reports that we submit to our vice presidents. But again, begin where you're at and realize that there is a difference between assessment, evaluation, and research. Assessment is really collecting data to make wise decisions about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. Evaluation is a next step, and that usually requires some kind of judgment to be made, and we determine whether it's good or bad. It worked, it didn't work. So you know, there's a little bit more at stake when it comes to evaluation. And then when we separate evaluation from research, it's basically we're taking that information and we're going to add it to the generalizable knowledge of the scientific community. And typically we know research from evaluation. Evaluation is typically internally funded, and research is usually externally funded. But again, those three layers do exist, and sometimes we interchange those words. But for the most part, most of us are probably doing assessment or evaluation unless we've gotten some external money. If you can, move forward from assessment and look at student learning outcomes, attitudinal changes, behavior changes, and move to more rigorous evaluation and research. And it seems like that is becoming more and more of an expectation of the feds, of the department. The University of South Alabama got audited. They had some compliance issues, and you'll see that in their buying a review, there were some things that the Department of Ed was not happy with, and as a result, they were required to describe their research methods, their data analysis tools, and really talk about the process that they were going to use to be a little bit more objective in saying how their programs were effective. They were also required to indicate who the office or the individual would be responsible for conducting the review. And then they also had to have the report approved by the university's chief executive officer and its board. So they are upping the ante when it comes to the evaluation. They want it to be more than just a group of people sitting around the table having a chat and drinking tea and eating crumpets and talking about you know, their subjective opinions about how things are going. So up to this point in time, we've been talking about programs, but again, they want us also focusing on policies. So for that, I would suggest kind of a data dump, a policy dump. You know, identify and compile all of your policies for students, staff, and faculty related to AODUs. Today, it's a little bit easier to do that because a lot of what we have is online, and you can just go ahead and search alcohol, other drugs, substance use, you know, those keywords, and to your university website search engine, and you'll typically find a lot of the things, and you may find things that you didn't even know existed. But when you're doing so, look for redundancy and look for inconsistencies, look for consistency in language. What I see a lot of times is that policies are created and they're not on a regular review process. They've not been touched for years. And we know that our substance use culture has changed. A lot of times these policies could be gravely in need of an update. When we look at what the Department of Ed really wants, is that they want to know that you not only have policies, but the policies are consistently enforced. And what they're really looking at is that the policies are consistently enforced across the population that we have on campus. So regardless of who a student is, regardless of who a staff or faculty is, that the same standards are offered across the playing board, and everybody is kind of on the same playing field, that there are no special advantages, no special considerations made to individuals based upon who they are, what groups they belong to, all those types of things. They also want to know how effective your policies are at moving your institution toward your alcohol and other drug goals and outcomes. Now, this is becoming more and more of an area that the auditors are looking at when they do come to audit the Drug-Free Schools and Campuses Act. I keep hearing from more and more people that, yeah, they're looking at this. And one of the things that I have heard several schools say that the auditors have requested is a chart. And basically they ask for a chart that lists every student as a case that has violated a substance use offense. And then in that particular file, they want basically the typical violations that the institution offers. And they want it noted what violations the student was given. And then sometimes what they will do is that they will also ask for affiliation of the students. So for example, and this is made up, they'll want to know if a student was an athlete. So in the second column, you'll see N for no and Y for yes. And at this particular fake university, they give fines, papers, educational classes, and or basics for students that might have minors in possession. And you'll see that a lot of people get fines, and you'll see that some people get papers, and some people get educational classes, and you'll see very few people get basics. But what you will end up noticing is that the student athletes get papers, but very few of the student athletes get fines. If you are not a student athlete, you end up getting an educational class or basics. And again, this is fake, and I made it up to illustrate the point. So you would take away from this that there does seem to be a difference between the athletes and the non-student athletes. And again, this is what they would be kind of looking at and looking for. And again, I've talked to several people who have said, yeah, this is kind of what they want, and they will request it either before the visit or the day of the visit, and then you'll have to send it to them afterwards. And this would be one of those things that many of you would have to probably work with student conduct, athletics department to try to compile all the data and make it happen and make it fit. I liken the biennial review process to a SWOT analysis where we look at our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And from that SWOT analysis, after we've done so, I think it's important to develop outcomes, goals, and objectives for the next 2 years, and to make recommendations and changes of programming, policy, and enforcement. And I think that's the key strength of the biennial review process. That is what makes it more than just a 3-ring binder that we end up putting up on our shelves and letting it collect dust until the next time we begin the biennial review process. IHAC has a list of suggested report content. You will see an outline of that content. We actually have a document that has a little bit more meat to it that gives some examples of things that would go under each heading. That is available through our website, through our Drug-Free Schools and Campuses Act page, and there's a Microsoft Word download that people can retrieve. So that way you can take that download and you can modify it based upon what data you have, what data your institution has, and really kind of make it your own report. One of the questions that I often get asked is who should be responsible for overseeing the biennial review? Who should be responsible for overseeing the Safe and Drug-Free Schools and Campuses Act? The CLARI Act requires that the campus have a compliance officer, and that is a formalized requirement. The Drug-Free Schools and Campuses Act does not specifically have that as a requirement, but I can tell you that the director of the CLARI Compliance Division, which now oversees Drug-Free Schools and Campuses Act, strongly recommends that the institution designate an individual and a department to oversee the Drug-Free Schools and Campuses Act. So if your campus has not done that, I would highly encourage you to do so. Several years ago, I was in contact with an institution that had an unfortunate incident at their institution. First thing that got requested by the prosecuting attorney was their biennial review. And what ended up happening was different offices were pointing the finger at other offices, thinking that other offices had the responsibility, and basically it had fallen through the cracks, and no one had really taken any ownership of the process, and nothing had really gotten done. And my understanding was that there really wasn't much that they could give to the prosecuting attorney. That came back to haunt the institution later. So regardless of who it is or what office it is, it's important to designate someone. I think it's an institutional choice. I know some campuses have the prevention or health education office do it. I know other campuses have the CLARI compliance officer be responsible for it. Some campuses have auditing and general counsel do it. Others have the vice president of student affairs. Every campus is different, so your campus will have to do what's best for itself. And my guess is if you're here today doing this webinar, chances are you're probably the person, or your office is probably going to be the individuals that will have the responsibility. In light of having an office or an individual being responsible, again, as you've heard me say, this is not really a task that should be lone rangered. It should not be a solo activity. It really needs to have a group effort. The group effort will help open up doors when it comes to data collection. It will help make sure that there is not an overly objective lens. Let me rephrase that. Overly subjective lens in interpreting data. You'll get different opinions when it comes to recommendations. So if there's something that's already existing on campus, whether it's a coalition, a task force, a healthy campus coalition, use that. If you don't have such a group, this is a really great starting activity to make that group come alive. It gives them purpose, it gives them mission, it gives them focus. Many hands make light work. And as I said, the more people you get involved, it helps with relationship building, especially if you got some tough cookies on campus that typically make it difficult to get some data from. Hopefully someone in the group knows that individual trusts someone on your group, and they'll be more willing and likely to give data to someone they know than someone that they don't. It also helps reduce siloing. It gets everyone on the same page. It allows some conversations about best practices and evidence-based, and brings people together, and may help reduce the number of ineffective practices happening on your campus, allowing reallocation of resources, staffing time, and money to things that may have a much better impact and efficacy in addressing this issue. One of the questions I often get is, well, who should be on this committee? And there's a list of usual suspects that I would recommend. If you have some substance use prevention practitioners, health educators, your clery compliance people, your dean of students, student conduct counseling, medical clinic, health services, res life, new student orientation, fraternity, sorority life, intercollegiate athletics, those are the usual suspects, and those are probably the people that you would normally think of, the people in your neighborhood that you would ask to the party. Some things, some folks that you may not think about. Student government, get students involved, get their buy-in. It will help immensely. If you have a graduate student government or council, they're important. And over the last 10 years, I've been to conferences and addressing the substance use needs and concerns of graduate students seems to be becoming a much stronger need than when I was a much younger professional. Staff senate, residence hall members, faculty senate, your disability services staff. Over the last 5 years, I've heard the issue of substance use becoming up more and more as a disability and having accommodations. So that's a person that would probably be very good to have at the table. Substance use is an issue that affects all domains of campus life, and a lot of times when we have these types of groups, we forget to invite business affairs folks, and they can be very valuable, especially in terms of resource allocation, budgeting, facilities, including BSWs. So bring them to the table. Human resources. We talked earlier about getting information from employee assistance programs. Human resources would be the people that would be the gatekeepers and get you to those people. Academic deans and academic advising, international programs, especially if your campus has a huge international population, as well as alumni services. So again, some unusual suspects that you might not think about when you think about these types of groups. I would also say invite people off campus. We know that substance use does not stop at our boundary. It spills over into our communities and regions. So local law enforcement, long-term residential groups, neighborhood associations, the mayor's office, the Liquor Control Commission, first responders, EMS, paramedics, Chamber of Commerce, hospitality establishments, depending upon your state and local ordinances, perhaps local marijuana businesses and establishments. Everybody has a stake in these topics, and it's probably important to bring everybody to the table. I often get asked what kind of group format works best, and every campus has its own different culture, and you'll probably have to take that into consideration. I've seen some groups work best with 2 co-leaders and 2 facilitators. Other groups have had an executive council with each member on the council overseeing a subgroup or committee, with the subgroups and committees meeting more regularly, with the larger group maybe meeting once a quarter or once every other month. You know, the larger group meets periodically depending upon how frequent the subgroups meet. Typically, there's a chain of command within administration. So, you know, within the facilitators or the co-leaders or the executive council, do you have representation from the senior level administration, or how does that executive council or co-leaders report to administration? That's an important consideration to have, because sometimes that group needs to be able to say, we are working under the authority of this particular senior level administrator. Some other considerations to this biennial review process and having a group to help develop and bring it along. You know, do you want it to be a formalized group, you know, where people are appointed to it and you have representation from different governing bodies and different governing groups throughout campus, or do you want it to be more informal and organic? Will you have established timelines? Will you be more laissez-faire? How will you communicate with one another? Things have gotten a lot easier with shared online communication tools, being able to post minutes and policies and materials and data and things such as a Google Docs drive or a shared OneDrive that everybody can access. Can be very key and critical when it comes to writing a report. People can put up a draft and people can comment, they can edit. It's a lot easier than what it was 20, 25 years ago when I was a much younger man and starting in this process. Depending upon your institution, if it's a private institution or a public institution, you'll have to think about records retention and what records will need to be kept and what records don't need to be kept, and how records will be stored. Institutional buy-in. You may have a great committee, you may have a great task force, you may be doing great work, but that group needs the support of senior level administration. The campus needs to know that the senior level administration is supporting that work and is bought into it. That will help open doors immensely. You may also need to think about a process to enact when data owners won't share their data. So, you know, when you sit there and say, hey, Joe, I need this data from you, and they're not giving it to you, what's the process? Do you have someone else who's a friend of that person go and ask for it? If they're on the committee, do you go to that person's supervisor? Do you go to that person's vice president? Do you have the president request that data? What is your process? Depending upon your institution, you may also have to think about, are your operations governed by the FOIA Act, the Freedom of Information Act? And if so, what happens if any of your meetings or data is FOIA'd, and how do you work with getting that information to whoever needs to review it to give it to the person who has requested it, as well as, you know, are you subject to the open meeting as you go through the process, some people would sit there and say, it says we just have to do a biennial review process. We don't have to have a report. And my response is, okay, when the auditors come, how do you document your process if you don't have a report? So I always encourage everybody to have a report. When it comes time to get close to the conclusion, that report's going to need to be reviewed and edited. Every campus is different, so you need to decide, is it going to be something that is edited by the entire group and everybody has a say? There's a feedback process, or is it something that the executive committee is going to have an opportunity to edit and they have the final say? Or does the executive committee give a draft to a department head or a vice president, and that person has the final say? And that needs to be communicated up front so no one's nose gets bent out of shape because they're upset because they've given feedback that was not incorporated into the final draft. And then, what's the finalized approval process? Is it a department chair? Is it an associate VP, a VP that approves it? Is it the president's council? Is it the board of trustees? And once that approval has been finalized, what then happens to the report? Is it put online? Is it posted in different offices? Those types of things. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a few more slides. I would say use this process as a tool to leverage your program. Too often people write a report and it ends up being put in a 3-ring binder and collecting dust. If it's even put in a 3-ring binder, these days it may just stay in a file in a shared drive or up in the cloud until somebody needs it. But the real purpose of the biennial review process is to demonstrate that your campus has an effective AOD prevention program. And if you don't have an AOD prevention program that's effective, that you're working to make one. The biennial review process isn't necessarily a bragging process about your successes. I encourage campuses to use it as a tool to leverage your program. And you can do that by sharing your findings, sharing your strengths, sharing your weaknesses, sharing why the work that you are doing is important and relevant in today's pressing priorities. We know that higher ed is constantly changing and evolving. We know that our students are stressed. We know that marijuana use is changing. So hopefully the biennial review process is done in light of these changing contexts, and you're connecting with the context to be able to say, this is why this work's important, this is why we do it, and this is how it's having a positive impact on our campus. One of the things that I have seen personally is sharing the findings and the themes of the biennial review has really helped address misperceptions. We had a town hall meeting several years ago, and several community members who live on a major thoroughfare where a lot of our students live, there's long-term residents have had to put up with some stuff. And their misperceptions were that everybody drank and everybody was getting drunk on Friday nights and it was just wild, wild west, and that the institution really hadn't done anything. But through that town hall meeting and using our biennial review information that we had collected, we were able to say, well, here's what we've been doing over the course of several years. This is how things have changed. This is how our data has changed. We appreciate this feedback that you're giving us. Evidently, this is still an issue. And what was nice is that they had said, well, it's not as bad as it used to be. Things have gotten better, but it's just not where we want it to be. And, we were able to find a middle ground and, able to work on it and improve upon that situation. We were able to say, these are the things we're working on, and this is what we intend to do. So, I felt very happy walking away from that meeting thinking that we had accomplished some major wins, that we had made some major allies, and that we were going to be able to do some better work than what we had done. And it was because we had a solid biennial review process, and we were willing to share the findings and results and what we wanted to do, the recommendations of that process going forward. So again, you know, once you have that biennial review process, if you want to do a road show, there are lots of people that would love to probably hear it. Administration, boards of trustees, divisional gatherings and meetings, different governing bodies on campus, whether it's faculty senate, staff senate, governing councils. I know that in our community, when I was more directly involved in our substance use efforts as a practitioner, I would get asked by a lot of the animal groups to go out and talk about our peer ed program and our interventions and basics and things like that, just to let people know what it was that we were doing to address high-risk alcohol use within our students. Having town hall meetings is another great option. SAMHSA has a communities town talk hall meeting. I think the latest round actually occurred this spring. I think they do it every even year. But in the past, they've been able to give $500 mini grants for campuses that have been willing to hold these town hall meetings. And that money's been able to be used as seed money, you know, for stipends, refreshments, publicity, just to be able to have those meetings. So that's a really good thing to look into if you're interested in having that kind of meeting. And as you've heard me say throughout, you know, it's just not about the here and now, it's about moving forward. The biennial review process really provides a great roadmap of moving forward, and a good biennial review process has goals and objectives that are well written. It provides some focus and some sharpness as to what you're doing forward, and it gives a starting point. And you know, the biennial review is really more than just a one-time event. It's an ongoing process. One of the things that I've found helpful to me, my staff have found helpful, and other campuses have said the same thing. Instead of collecting data every 2 years, it may be useful just to collect data annually to help remind people, hey, we do this every year. And then if somebody happens to vacate a position, they move on, you know, you catch them earlier, you let them know that that data needs to be collected. Whereas if you wait 2 years, then they've got a lot of catch up to do, especially if it's not been on their radar. The last few questions that I get is, okay, we've got our biennial review, we've done our process, we've got a report, we've got our notice. What do we do with it? Who do we send it to? Do we upload it? Where does it go? A lot of people are used to Clary and are used to having to upload it and send it to Washington. With the Drug-Free Schools Act, that is currently not the practice. We do not send it anywhere. We do not file it anywhere specifically. We do not email it anywhere. Well, the notice we have to send out to students, but with the report, we don't. So unless the Department of Ed contacts you and says that you're being audited or specifically request it, we do not send the biennial review report to the Department of Ed. What I typically suggest is that you send a final copy to your president, your senior level administrator, for signature and certification. And then you send signed copies to places on campus that you think anyone who might have an interest in this report would go. So definitely to financial aid, because you know that's the greatest likelihood of a department that's going to be audited by the Department of Ed for Title IV recertification. And when that Title IV recertification comes up, they're probably going to ask for Drug-Free Schools and Campuses Act materials. If you have a grants office, it's probably wise to send it there, send it to your Clary compliance officer, the folks that run your prevention programs, your alcohol interventions. More and more campuses seem to be putting their biennial review report online for public access. It's not required, but again, more and more schools seem to be doing it. I would recommend it as a good practice. So with that, I would open up the floor to any questions that anyone might have. Hey, I'm not seeing any questions being answered. Sorry, any questions being asked? Oh, Autumn is asking if the sessions will be accessed. Yes, so I know the IHEC staff has been putting them on YouTube. I will be sending the PowerPoints over to the staff and they will be putting them up on the page. The IHEC page, which is eiu.edu/IHEC. And when you get there, there'll be a tab of links, kind of like a header across the top. The tab link at the far right, I think, says resources. If you click on that, there'll be a drug-free schools. Some of our older versions of some of earlier versions of this webinar series will be there, as well as some of the templates of the certification, the biennial review outline, the drug and alcohol prevention program notice will be there. And our intent is to go ahead and upload some of the newer revised ones. We've just not been able to do that yet. Other questions? Very well. Well, question, how has COVID changed this process at all? If anything, my guess is that there has not been as much enforcement from the Department of Ed. And my assumption is when I look at the federal websites where they typically list schools that have been found in violation and they have program review findings, there does not seem to be as many schools that have been found in violation as there were pre-COVID. So I just don't know if they're not sending auditors out as much and as frequently. But as for the expectations for programming and things like that, we're still expected to be meeting meeting the requirements. So whether it's instead of doing things in person, shifting to online, there's probably that assumption. But again, the challenge with this act is that the law and the requirements have not been rewritten since 1989. There were some small minor modifications in '94, but really for the most part, the language and terms used are about 33 years old.
Eric, did you answer the question asking about the template of examples of well-done reports?
Well-done reports. Rich Lucy from the drug DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, through his college initiative efforts, he is actually working on collecting some biennial reviews, and he hopes to have some draft documents and templates and some examples of what he views as good ones on his website. So he has been in contact with me, and I'm going to be sending him a few. And I know he's working on that, but I haven't been able to talk to him about his timelines. And I can't think of that URL for his initiative right now. I would imagine if you Googled Drug Enforcement Agency college prevention, you'd probably get to his series of web pages pretty easily. I'm not necessarily certain, and if Geneva, I hope I didn't butcher your name. I'm not necessarily certain if you're asking about the copies of the 4 sessions and the materials that I've generated, such as the template, the outline for the biennial review, the drug and alcohol prevention program notice, or if you're talking about the examples of drug-free school biennial review reports. Our stuff, I'm going to ask Jennifer and Madison to post those and send notice out to everybody who's attended one of the workshops. We know that that'll be done before July 1st, before the end of our contract year. We've got to have that done as one of our deliverables. Madison is actually leaving us at the end of June, as well as Jennifer, and we're not certain about our funding for next year yet. So until we get some notification from the state of Illinois, I can't go out and hire a replacement for Madison, but I'll try to get some word from Rich, and if Rich is able to give me some information, I'll try to get it out to everybody as well. Okay. Yeah, I'll try to get it out from Rich. He may have some stuff up. It's a project that he's worked on in the past, so he may be just updating what he may have up there. So again, it would be going to the DEA college website. Let me see if I can pull up my phone and see if I can find a link. It's www.dfsca.gov. www.campusdrugprevention.gov is the website. And I would recommend that everybody look at that particular website. Rich has been with the DEA for several years. If you're not familiar with it, it's got some great podcasts. They've got a really strong advisory board, so there's a really strong strategic planning guide. They've got a great practitioners toolbox. I think the toolbox is where, yep, if you go to the toolbox, there is a sample campus biennial review report. I'm going to try to pull that link for you guys. There. That should be the link to Rich's site that has sample reports. Looks like there's 2 there right now, but I know he's looking for some more. So if any of you feel like you have a great biennial review report that your institution would be willing to share with the world, he would be okay with it. It is, you all should have gotten it. I sent it to everybody. There we go. There, I went ahead and sent it again. So hopefully everybody got it. But if you look at the, I hope everybody can see the website. Again, there's only 2 right there, but again, if you look at this website, it's got a lot of great things. It talks with Prevention with Purpose, which is the strategic planning guide. It has some sample campus alcohol and other drug policies with conduct standards, program notice, those types of things. Webinars, it's a great site. Rich has done a lot of work on it. the thing that I like is that it's got a lot of podcasts, and Rich does a really good job of interviewing a lot of folks in the field, a lot of great colleagues on a lot of different things. So, I mean, just even listening to the podcast are really great. So I would encourage you to take some time to look at that website if you haven't. So with that, any last questions? Well, with that, we thank you for being with us today. We hope that you have a great Wednesday. Hopefully it is cool where you are, and have the rest of a great summer. Thank you all. Bye-bye.